My name is Margaret Ellen Hayes, and I turned 68 years old last March. I taught 3rd grade at Pinecrest Elementary in Greenville, South Carolina for 35 years. 35 years of tying shoelaces that weren't mine, wiping tears that weren't my children's, and spending my own money on construction paper and crayons because the school budget never stretched far enough. I retired in 2019 with a pension that covers my bills and not much else. A small savings account I've been careful with since my husband Thomas passed, and a house on Clover Mill Road that I've lived in since 1988. I want to tell you something before I go any further. I am not a foolish woman. I raised 2 children mostly on my own after Thomas got sick. I balanced a checkbook before most people my age had heard of a spreadsheet. I coached the school's math club for 11 years. I am telling you this because what I'm about to share with you, I need you to understand it didn't happen because I was naive. It happened because I loved my son more than I loved my own common sense. And I'm still not entirely sure that was the wrong thing to do. I just know it cost me. My son's name is Derek. He's 42 now. When he was 7 years old, he used to save his Halloween candy and ration it out over 3 months, so it would last until Valentine's Day. That's the kind of boy he was, methodical, careful, a planner. I used to brag about it to anyone who would listen. My Derek, I'd say, that boy is going to be just fine in this world. I was right about that, at least on the surface. Derek works as a software engineer at a tech company in Charlotte. He makes good money. Better money than I ever saw in my teaching career. He drove a nice car. He and his wife Vanessa live in a 4-bedroom house in a neighborhood with a homeowners association that sends letters if your grass gets too long. Vanessa, I want to be fair here. I really do. She's not a bad person. I think she loves Derek in her way. But from the very beginning, she had ideas about the kind of life they should be living, and those ideas always seemed to cost just a little more than what they actually had. The vacations to Cabo, the kitchen renovation, 2 years after they bought the house, the private preschool for my grandson Noah that cost more per month than my mortgage. Noah, that's the other person in this story. He's 5 now, and he has Thomas's eyes, that particular shade of grey-green that I haven't seen in anyone else in 30 years. The first time I held him, I cried so hard. Derek had to take him back from me. I drove to Charlotte every other weekend for the first 2 years of his life. I showed up with homemade banana bread and little board books, and I sat on their kitchen floor for hours building block towers just so I could watch Noah knock them down and laugh. That little boy is the reason I said yes to things I should have said no to. I want to be honest about that. The first time Derek asked to borrow money was in the spring of 2021. He called on a Tuesday evening, which already felt off. Derek usually texts. He said they'd had an unexpected expense come up, something with the roof, a section over the garage that needed to be repaired before the rainy season hit. He said the contractor wanted $3,500 and he was a little short that month because they'd just paid their property taxes. Could I help? He'd pay me back by the end of summer. I said yes. I transferred the money the next day. By August I hadn't heard anything about repayment. I didn't bring it up. I told myself it was a gift really, not a loan. I could afford to be generous. Thomas had left me with a small life insurance payout, and I'd been careful with it. I had just over $40,000 in a savings account at First Citizens Bank that I thought of as my what-if money. What if the furnace broke? What if I needed a new roof myself? What if I got sick? $3,500 was a dent, but not a crisis. The second time was November of that same year. $8,000. Derek said it was medical bills from when Noah had his tonsils out. They'd hit their deductible, but there was still a balance the insurance hadn't covered, plus Vanessa had some dental work done, and it had all piled up at once. He sounded stressed in a way that made something in my chest tighten. I thought about Thomas, about those last 2 years when the medical bills came faster than we could open them, And I said yes. I want you to notice something. I'm not an ATM. I thought about each of those decisions. I prayed about them. I talked to my friend Carol about the second one. She said, Maggie, you work hard for that money. And I said, Carol, he's my son. That felt like enough of an answer at the time. There were 3 more requests over the next 18 months. Smaller ones. $1,200 when their air conditioner went out in July 2000 when Derek said his car needed a new transmission. $800 for what he described as a temporary cash flow gap between paychecks. I kept a small notebook in the kitchen drawer, the kind with the marbled cover that I used to use for grocery lists. I started writing them down. Not because I expected repayment, really. Just because I am a woman who keeps records. Old teaching habit. You write things down so you don't misremember. By January of this year, that notebook had 1 page with 5 entries totaling just over $15,000. I still hadn't been paid back a single dollar. I want to tell you about the Thursday in February when everything shifted for me. Derek called and said he had some exciting news. He and Vanessa were planning a big birthday party for Noah, his 5th birthday. A real celebration, renting out the party room at the Discovery Place Kids Museum in Charlotte. About 30 people, he said. Family, close friends, some of Noah's little classmates. He asked if I could contribute to the catering since Vanessa had her heart set on a specific catering company and the quote had come in higher than they expected. The quote was $2,200. He was asking me to cover half. Something moved in me that I didn't have a name for yet. Not quite anger. Something quieter and colder than anger. I said I needed to think about it. Derek said, of course, Mum, no pressure, in that easy voice he has, and we hung up. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that call. I looked out the window at the backyard where Thomas built a little wooden bench under the oak tree the summer before he got his diagnosis. I thought about my savings account balance, which was now sitting at $23,000. I thought about the fact that Derek had never once mentioned the money from the notebook. Not a reference, not an acknowledgement, not an I know I owe you, Mum, I haven't forgotten. I called my friend Gloria, who is 71 and has a son who put her through something similar about 6 years ago. She listened to the whole thing without interrupting, which is one of her great gifts. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, Maggie, what does Derek do for a living again? And I said he's a software engineer. And she said, what does he make? And I said I didn't know exactly, but I knew it was well into 6 figures because he'd mentioned it once, casually, the way people do when they want you to know without seeming like they're bragging. And Gloria said, very gently, Honey, where do you think the money is going? I didn't sleep well that night. I told Derek I'd contribute $1,000 toward the catering. I transferred it the following Monday. The party was scheduled for the 2nd Saturday in March. On the Thursday before the party, Derek called again. His voice was different this time. Careful, apologetic. He said he was so sorry, but they'd had to cancel the party. Noah had come down with something, possibly strep, and the doctor wanted him to rest. They'd reschedule, he said. Maybe do something smaller at home in a few weeks. He said he'd make sure I got to celebrate with Noah. He'd call me once the little guy was feeling better. I said I was sorry to hear that. I asked if Noah needed anything. Derek said no, they were fine, just going to rest and lay low this weekend. I hung up the phone and I sat with that feeling again, the quiet, cold one. Here is what I did not tell Derek. My neighbour's daughter, a sweet woman named Patrice who works with Vanessa at the same hospital, had mentioned to me just 2 days earlier, completely offhand, that Vanessa had invited her to Noah's birthday party that Saturday. Patrice had been looking forward to it. She'd already bought a gift, so the party wasn't cancelled. I just wasn't going to be there. I didn't call Derek back. I didn't call Vanessa. I went to bed that Thursday night, and I thought about 35 years of third graders, And I thought about Thomas, and I thought about my notebook with its 5 entries and $15,000, and I thought about Noah's grey-green eyes, and I thought about the fact that my son had looked me in my face, or rather, spoken to me in my voice, and lied to me without a moment of hesitation. Saturday morning I got up, put on my good grey slacks and my blue cardigan, the one Thomas always said brought out my eyes. I did my hair. I was in the car by 10:15, Discovery Place. Kids is about a 90-minute drive from Greenville. I've made that drive so many times I could do it with my eyes closed. I didn't call ahead. I didn't make a plan exactly. I just drove. I got there a little before noon. The parking lot had a cluster of cars I recognized. Derek's, Vanessa's sister's minivan, a few others. I sat in my car for a few minutes. I watched a couple carry a wrapped gift through the front entrance. Through the glass doors I could see balloons, blue and yellow, Noah's favorite colors. I had picked those colors out with Vanessa 2 years ago when we'd done his bedroom together. I'm going to be honest with you. I sat in that car, and I cried. Not dramatically, just the kind of quiet crying that happens when something you hoped wasn't true turns out to be true anyway. I cried for about 5 minutes. Then I blew my nose, checked my lipstick in the rearview mirror, and got out of the car. I did not go inside immediately. I stood near the entrance and I called my son. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Hey, Mom." Casual. Easy. Absolutely no idea. I said, "Hi, sweetheart. How's Noah feeling today?" "Still resting." A pause. Just half a second, but I've been reading silences for 35 years of parent-teacher conferences. I know what a caught pause sounds like. "Yeah," he said. "He's on the couch, pretty tired. You know how kids are with strep." I said, "That's too bad. Give him a hug from Grandma." And then I said, "Derek, I'm standing in the parking lot of Discovery Place, kids." The silence that followed was a different kind entirely. I didn't yell. I want you to know that. I am 68 years old, and I have never believed that volume equals power. I spoke to my son in the same voice I used to use when I caught a 3rd grader cheating on a spelling test. Calm, clear, and completely certain of what I'd seen. I told him I was coming inside. I told him we didn't have to make a scene, but I told him that after the party I needed him to sit down with me and we were going to have an honest conversation, the first one we'd had in apparently quite some time. He said, "Mom." I said, "I'll see you inside." Noah saw me before Derek did. He came running across the room in his little dinosaur shirt and crashed into my knees, and whatever else was happening in that moment, that part was real and it was good. I held that boy for a long moment and I breathed him in. Then I straightened up and I looked at my son across the room. Derek had the decency to look ashamed. Vanessa, to her credit, looked more stricken than I expected. Not defiant, just pale. I spent 2 hours at that party. I ate birthday cake. I watched Noah open gifts. I talked to Vanessa's sister, who doesn't know any of this and was perfectly nice. I behaved like the grandmother I am, because Noah is 5 years old, and none of this is his fault, and I was not about to ruin his birthday over his parents' failures. But I watched my son move around that party, and I added things up in my head. The catering spread. It was beautiful, actually. Little sandwiches and a fruit tower and a custom cake from a bakery in Dilworth that I happen to know charges quite a bit. The party room rental. The activity stations Derek had set up. The small gift bags for every child. I thought about the $1,000 I had sent for catering. I thought about the $15,000 in my notebook. After the party, after Noah had been buckled into his car seat, Derek and Vanessa and I sat in their car in the parking garage. Vanessa kept her eyes on her hands in her lap. Derek looked at the steering wheel. I took out my phone. Not to be dramatic, I just knew I needed to have the numbers in front of me, because I knew I might cry again, and I did not want to forget anything. I read from my notebook, every date, every amount, every reason Derek had given me at the time. $3,500, April 2021, roof repair. $8,000, November 2021, medical bills. $1,200 the following July, air conditioner. $2,000, October 2022, car transmission. $800, February 2023, cash flow. $1,000 this February, Noah's birthday party catering. Total, $15,500. When I finished reading, the car was so quiet I could hear the ventilation system running. Then I said the question I'd been holding since that phone call with Gloria. I said, Derek, you earn more in 3 months than I earned in a year at the end of my teaching career. I need you to help me understand where the money goes. And here is where the story cracked open. Vanessa looked up. She looked at Derek, and something passed between them that told me she had not known the full picture either. It came out slowly, the way these things do. Derek had taken out a personal loan in 2020 to cover a trading loss. He'd gotten into investing during the pandemic, the kind of thing a lot of people did, and he'd lost a significant amount. He'd hidden it from Vanessa. He'd been making payments on it for 3 years on top of their regular expenses, and the payments were substantial. Instead of telling either of us the truth, he'd been borrowing from me and telling us separate partial stories. Vanessa thought the money for the medical bills had actually gone to medical bills. She had not known about the trading loss. She had not known about the loan. She found all of this out in a parking garage in Charlotte, with her mother-in-law reading from a marbled notebook. I watched my daughter-in-law's face change as she understood. I am not going to pretend that the conversation that followed was clean or easy. Vanessa was furious, genuinely deeply furious, in a way that actually made me feel a complicated kind of solidarity with her. Derek cried. He said things about shame and pressure, and not knowing how to tell us, and I believe that all of that was real. I do. I raised him. I know when he's performing, and I know when he's breaking. He was breaking. But I also knew, sitting there in that parking garage, that I could not let love be the reason I handed him a soft landing again. I told Derek I needed him to see a financial counselor. I told him I needed him to tell Vanessa everything. Not the version he'd been managing, everything. And I told him I needed a repayment plan in writing. Not because I needed the money back urgently. I still have enough, but because I needed him to understand that what he'd been doing was not a grey area. He had looked me in my eyes, metaphorically speaking, over and over again, and told me things that were not true, so that I would open my wallet. That is a thing that has a name. I needed him to hear the name. He agreed to all of it. I don't know yet what that agreement is worth. Time will tell. I drove home to Greenville that Saturday evening, 90 minutes back down I-85, just me and the radio. I stopped at a Cracker Barrel somewhere around Gaffney and had a real dinner, the kind with biscuits, and I sat at a table for one and looked out the window at the parking lot and felt about 6 different things at once. Sad, yes. Still angry, in that quiet way, but also something I wasn't entirely expecting. Lighter. There's something that happens when you stop pretending you don't see what you see. Like when you've been holding your breath without realizing it, and you finally just exhale. I had been telling myself for 2 years that Derek would bring it up, that he was just embarrassed, that he would make it right when he was ready. I had been doing what I spent 35 years watching parents do at report card conferences. I had been protecting my child from the consequence of his own choices, because the consequence of his own choices was also a consequence for me. It would mean admitting I'd been fooled. It would mean admitting that my careful, candy-rationing son had grown into a man who could lie to his mother with ease. I got home around 9:30. I fed my cat, Winston. I sat in the chair by the front window where I can see the oak tree Thomas built the bench under, and I called Gloria. She picked up on the second ring. "Well," she said. I told her the whole thing. She listened the way she always does. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Maggie, you always were the best teacher at Pinecrest." I laughed. It surprised me. I hadn't expected to laugh that night, but I did. There's a thing I used to tell my third graders every year, the first week of school, when they were still new and nervous and figuring out how the world of my classroom worked. I'd tell them, in this room, the truth is never the worst thing. The worst thing is staying quiet when something's wrong. I must have said that to 2,000 children over the course of my career. I'm 68 years old. It took me until this year to take my own advice. Derek and I have spoken 3 times since that Saturday. The conversations are stilted and careful in a way they never were before, and I won't pretend that doesn't hurt. He went to a financial counselor. He sent me the appointment confirmation, which I appreciated. He and Vanessa are working through things in their own way. Noah called me last Sunday to tell me he'd lost his first tooth, and we talked for 12 minutes about the tooth fairy's going rate, which I looked up and told him was approximately $5 these days, adjusted for inflation. He thought that was hilarious. "Grandma, you know about inflation," he said. "Baby," I said, "your grandma knows about everything. I keep the notebook in the kitchen drawer still. I haven't written anything new in it. I don't know how this ends." Real life doesn't have the kind of ending where everything resolves and you know the lesson and you close the cover and it's done. Derek might pay me back or he might not. He might become someone who tells the truth or he might not. Vanessa and I might get closer through this or the distance might grow. I don't know. What I know is that I spent 35 years teaching children that honesty is not the same thing as cruelty, and that loving someone does not mean absorbing their dishonesty without comment. I know that I have 43 years of friendship with a woman named Thomas Hayes, who would have looked at that parking lot situation and known exactly what to do, and that even though he's been gone for 9 years, I can still feel, sometimes, the shape of how he would have handled things. Quiet, fair, and completely unwilling to be made small. I know that the savings account I've been rebuilding, one careful month at a time, is mine. I worked for that money. I gave up summers and evenings and weekends for that money. I loved my students, and I loved my job, and I would do it all again, but I did not do it so that my son could cover the evidence of his own mistakes with my retirement fund. And I know that the next time Noah comes to visit, Derek and I have agreed he can still come. We've agreed on that much. I'm going to take him to the bench under the oak tree, and we're going to feed the squirrels like we always do, and he's going to talk about dinosaurs for 45 minutes. And I'm going to listen to every single word. Some things you don't compromise. I know which ones are mine. I've been thinking a lot lately about cause and effect, not in any grand or spiritual sense, just the plain, unglamorous version of it that plays out in ordinary life, the version where the choices you make, quietly and consistently, over months and years, eventually catch up with you, all of them, the ones you're proud of and the ones you aren't. Derek didn't become someone who could lie to his mother overnight. That's the part that took me the longest to sit with. There wasn't a single moment where he turned into that person. It happened in increments. Each time I said yes without asking questions. Each time I transferred the money and told myself it was love and not avoidance. Each time he watched me absorb the cost of his choices without consequence. We built that together, the two of us. I handed him the tools, and he used them, and neither of us said a word about what we were actually constructing. That's what I mean when I say it's about cause and effect. The money was never really the point. The money was just the evidence. What I've come to understand, and I'm 68 years old, so I feel I've earned the right to say this plainly, is that intelligence without honesty is just a more sophisticated way of getting lost. Derek is a genuinely smart man. He solved a financial problem he was ashamed of by engineering a web of small lies that held together for almost 3 years. That took a certain kind of cleverness, but cleverness in the service of avoidance isn't wisdom. It's just a longer road to the same reckoning. The notebook caught up with him. The parking lot caught up with him. Truth has a way of doing that, not because the universe is keeping score, but because reality is stubborn and it doesn't renegotiate. The harder lesson, the one I'm still working on, is about what it costs a person to keep quiet when they know something is wrong. I kept that notebook for 2 years. I wrote down every date and every dollar and every excuse, and I told myself I was just keeping records. But I think I was also keeping evidence for a conversation I was too afraid to start. That silence had a price too. Not just in dollars, in the slow erosion of something between me and my son that I'm not sure how long it will take to rebuild. What I want for Derek, genuinely want, not the version of wanting that's just thinly disguised control, is for him to develop the particular kind of courage it takes to tell the truth when the truth makes you look bad. That is not a small thing. It is, I'd argue, one of the most important things a grown person can learn. Not talent, not success, not the 4-bedroom house in the neighborhood with the HOA. The ability to look someone in the eye and say, I made a mistake. Here is what it cost. Here is what I'm going to do about it. That takes moral backbone. Derek has the intelligence. He's always had it. The backbone is what we're working on now. And as for me, I spent 35 years teaching children that the truth is never the worst thing. I should have spent a little more time applying that to my own front door. I won't make that mistake again, not because I love Derek less, because I love him clearly now, without the fog of pretending I don't see what I see. That kind of love, the honest kind, is harder and it's lonelier sometimes, but it's the only kind I have left to give. Noah lost his first tooth last Sunday. He called me to report it, very seriously, like breaking news. That boy is going to be just fine.